how to grow school garden planning and management. This is my topic today. And these are the structures I mentioned. And when we have these great amount of structures where school garden is embedded, then we can see that school garden management is a complex thing. And I want to show you something, how it can work. Well, management is something that controls resources and processes to achieve a certain objective in an effective and efficient way. Well, if you look effective and efficient, what is the difference between these two words? We have also these two aspects. The first is that we look at what we shall do. That means that we choose the optimal measures for our objective. So we do the right thing. And what means efficient? Efficient is the question, how shall we do this, what we have choose, this measure? That means to find the optimal cost-benefit relation. So doing it right. This is the difference. And this must be in the management process. You find in an optimal management process, you find both these things, that you do it effective and efficient. And in school garden management, you have certain objectives and of course also certain objects of management. Objectives can be the long-term use of the outside area of a school with a minimum of effort and a maximum of pedagogic profit. Or perhaps the maximum independence from single persons in school garden work by a structural anchoring of school garden in the everyday school life. This may be the objectives of your school garden management. And then you have different objects of the management. The object can be the new or the replanning of a school garden or of an outside area. The object can be the resources and the equipment with it has the spatial resources, the physical resources, and of course, this is the main thing, the personal resources. But it can also be the internal or external organization of school garden. So here you have an overview of the school garden management in time scales. What do you want is the planning and the designing of the school garden. So this is a thing you do once, but of course, some time you will look over your school garden. Is it still fitting to the purpose you have, to the objectives you have, and then you can think about a redesign, of course. But normally, at first, if you look at it is a thing you do once, and then you have in your organization fixed structures like school garden, a school garden coordinator at school, different actors like work groups or classes. And you, of course, must think about the regular garden maintenance, who does this. And then you have regular events of annual planning, doing a working plan, a cropping, and caring plan for the school garden, a booking plan if you have several groups in the school who are using the school garden, irrigation plan for the summer break, and the project plans for the teachers. And of course, you may have several fixed resources, and this is very good to have these fixed resources for the school garden maintenance. And you have some flexible resources, and you have to consider both in the state of designing and planning the garden. And if you begin to plan a garden, you must have be aware of the fixed resources you have, and you can anticipate or plan with the flexible resources, and this has an effect on the way of planning your school garden. So if we begin to plan a school garden, we have at first to consider what are the different visions what we can have for our garden. So Do we want to have an edible garden, a kitchen garden where we plant edible plants and perhaps make something with them in the kitchen of the school? Or do we think about a flower garden? Do we have a vision of beauty and flowers and colors in our garden? Or do we think about a wildlife garden with several biotopes? Or do we have a vision of a resort garden where we have heard it in the speech of Professor Retzlaff first, it has a very great impact on health and even on mental health. So these are the different aspects and visions of garden we may have before we begin to plan a garden. The second which we have to consider is our motivations. Why do we want to have a garden? Perhaps we want that our children learn how potatoes, carrots, etc. grow because they don't know it yet, and even the parent generation now doesn't sometimes know how they grow. Perhaps we want to. Perhaps we want that our children become familiar with native wildlife, with native plants and native animals which are in our surroundings. Perhaps we have in mind that we have to make them familiar with regional food in context of climate education. And so we go in the garden and cultivate regional food and show them when this food is ripe and when we can pick strawberries that is not in the winter, but in the summer. Then we can we may want that the children can do hands-on activities for practical wildlife conservation. And of course, what we had in the speech of Mrs. Retzlaff first, the nature contact is one of our main objectives when we construct a school garden. But of course, we also want children to assume a sense of responsibility when they themselves seed and plant and care for plants. Then they learn to be responsible for living life. And we prefer other methods of teaching, so such as holistic learning, head, heart, and hands. Then we prefer perhaps to have an environment, a learning environment, which moves the children. It makes them move and healthy. This is also what we heard. And then we have perhaps we consider also the therapeutical. I just have to make it. Okay. The therapeutical effects of gardening, and we want to construct a garden in this purpose. And of course, we heard about job preparation. If we are in a secondary school and we want the students to get an idea about green jobs, then is also one of the motivations to construct a school garden. And then the visions and beside the visions and the motivations, we have also several situations in which we are when we start school garden planning. For example, our Booster Club has donated 4 raised beds for the schools, and now we are asking where can we install them and what can we cultivate in the garden. And another situation may be our outside areas, very small and are entirely sealed, yet we would like to garden, but we don't know where and how we can do it. Another situation with this typical is that our school garden is completely overgrown. It hasn't been cared for since years. And now we are a small but very engaged team, and we like to attempt a reset of the garden. A situation which I hear very, very often. Another situation is that you don't have a space on the school ground itself, but you have an allotment garden association in your neighborhood who provided you a garden plot. And it's often so that these people who provided this, they offer to advise you and to irrigate the garden during the summer break. And the last and perhaps the optimal situation is that you have a large outside area with a lot of options, and you have a staff that has decided to set up a school garden, and you can build a planning group and a designing group, and you have much freedom to plan and design. So these are the conditions under which you begin the planning and designing of the school gardens. These are all things that you have to consider when you start, and which has an impact on the result, of course. Well, I have no time enough to go through all the checklists that we have published here, but in German on this side. I just tell you the several checklists which we have published. We talked about principles in the school garden planning. You have to consider how do you want to use the school garden and who wants to use the school garden. Of course, you have to consider the site conditions like soil and slope and shadow and so on. And you have to consider what do you need in terms of infrastructure, means of course water and so on. Which elements do you want to install, and something about the beds of raised beds or ground beds and so on. I just want to show you the principle, because I think it's very important. One of the most important principles is participation. You should involve in your planning all people and all institutions which have any thing to do with it, especially the municipals and the officials who can decide about the ground and the space where you want to construct your school garden. Then one very important principle is flexibility. Do not plan too stable constructions and try to have constructions which are easy to deconstruct. It is important because you don't have, you often don't have a stable personal situations for the garden. So if there is a grade or there you have, for example, 10 or 20 raised beds, and then you don't have enough personnel 2 years later after you have constructed it will be overgrow and nobody has fun with it because it's too much work then. So it should be easy to deconstruct your elements. And very important for the lessons which you plan in the school garden is that there is a spatial differentiation in functional spaces. So you need spaces for activity, spaces for retreat, spaces for the work, the central garden work, but also spaces where you can just observe and discover nature, spaces where you can do experiments, where you construct something with limber, for example, places where the children can play, and of course also spaces for retreat and communication. And one is a very, selbstverständlich, you should design barrier-free. So because you don't have these all checklists for school garden planning in English, in our homepage, I recommend you this book where I have stolen the title of my workshop here, How to Grow a School Garden, from Arden Buckley-Sporer and Rachel Catherine Pringle from California School Garden Network. And there you find an excellent guideline for parents and teachers to construct school gardens and to organize and manage school gardens. I think it's a very, very useful book for all who want to run a school garden. We just have a look on a model school garden here, and I tell some for perhaps some planning advices and planning tips for you. It is always good to have a lawn where you can, which is very easy to maintain, and it's much more easy than to maintain and care of beds. So if you have lawn, it will reduce the work, the amount of work in the school garden. Of course, very important is an outdoor classroom where you can meet and gather with the whole class or whole learning group you have to prepare the work in the garden in a lesson at the beginning of the lesson and of the end of the lesson. Then several seats and deposits where the students can work in small groups, such as breakout rooms. Here you have, of course, small working groups in lessons, and they also have to have a place where can sit down and write something or examine something. And so some seats and deposits are useful as well. Of course, you need this tool shed. It need not to be in the garden itself. It can also be in the school building, but it is good to have it near the garden, at least. And of course, you need irrigation, water and drink water tanks, which are on not too far away from the beds, who have to be irrigated. A compost place is, it's like a heart of the garden is the compost, where you can show the circle of life. Then I think a very important element of gardens are wild corners, where children can observe and see how nature functions, how nature works itself without any impact of men, and that they learn nature is independent of men, but not vice versa. You can, in the lawn, you can have some aisles of meadows, where you can then observe flowers and insects with the children. One very nature near element is also a hedge of native shrubs. Which doesn't mean much maintenance, but which has a high potential for discovering and observing nature processes and many animals. For the edible aspect of school gardens, many school gardens have fruit trees and berry bushes, where you can eat from the bush, from the tree directly the fruits. Then you have to consider, where do you have an entry of the school garden, and do you do you need a fence for the school garden? I really recommend to look if you have a fireplace. Fire is a very fascinating element for children and makes the school garden lessons very attractive. And then last but not least, you have beds, you have raised beds or ground beds, where you can cultivate with the children many things. But you see on this school garden that the beds are not really the elements which have the most space in the school garden. They are the smallest elements. The others take much more place. This is because if you want to have or want to make a good lesson in the school garden, you need other places behind or beside the beds, because in the beds you can just work with 2, 3, 4, 5 children perhaps, and the other children always have to do other things. And so you have to have a garden where they can do other things and not just sit and look, and it's boring, but it has to be an exciting environment. Last but not least, you need pathways and squares where you can run on and walk on and gather. So if you want to formulate a golden rule of school garden planning, it might be you have to consider your resources. What do you have? And your needs. What do you want? And if you what can the needs be? So you have to consider the models you have of the school garden. You have to consider the pedagogic incentives. You have to consider the know-how which is there. And of course, you have to consider your spatial resources, which is what is the area like you want to um, make your school garden. And the most important, of course, how are the personal resources, the resources of time, because the personal resources is the most frequent limiting factor for school gardening. This is you have to consider it from the beginning. Or how many people are we? How many time can we spend on school gardening? And who who makes what in the school garden? And you have to consider all these things, not only for here and today, but you can also look over the garden fence and consider what is next door and use the resources, what you have from next door. The help, for example, for parents and grandparents and neighbors and associations which you have around. And you have to, or it's useful to anticipate what you perhaps could have in future and do not obstruct potentials for the future. That is in, in fact, relevant for the spatial resources. If you have a great or large area where can potentially make your garden, and you say, oh, now we can't do so much now. So begin very small, but perhaps if in the future you have more persons and more, well, personal resources, and you can, yeah, you can manage a greater area. So don't say at first, oh no, we just need 100 square meters more. We cannot manage more. No, take the 300, 400, 500 you're offered, and then say, we just have a lawn on 400 square meters, and we just begin with 100 square meters, but in future, perhaps we can also manage these 500 square meters. So your planning should be targeted. So you should know what are really my objectives, what are my visions, what are the motivations for my school garden, and you should always be aware of your limits. So one of the most important thing that you that it is to be considered is the cost-benefit relation between the maintenance effort and the learning chances of several garden elements. So if you look at on several garden elements, you can see that there are very high learning chances, but they have perhaps very low maintenance effort. And this would be a very good cost-benefit relation. And so I show it now for several garden elements. What most people see when they think about school garden are beds with annuals. So vegetables, herbs, and flowers. And this is, of course, very nice. And this is, of course, has very high learning chances when the kids themselves seed, plant, harvest, eat. This is a very, very good for the nutrition education. But these beds, you have a very high maintenance effort. If you want to have a less high maintenance effort, you can perhaps have beds with perennials like herbs and flowers. Then you have still very high learning chances, but the maintenance effort is much lower, perhaps immediate. And if you have fruit trees, it is even very low, the maintenance effort, but you have still a very high learning chances with berry bushes or fruit trees when you cultivate these and make project with the children with these. So you can, well, I don't explain every element of these this table now. You will get it. You can get the presentation later and see all the elements in the table. But if you plan a school garden, you should have in mind, when I want to have, for example, raised beds and cultivate vegetables, it will be a high maintenance effort. But if I have not much time and not much personal resources, perhaps I could switch in my plans to have more wild corners, more biotops, more meadow area, so that I have still a high potential of learning chances, but less high maintenance effort. So let's come to the second. If I have planned a school garden and built up a school garden, then it begins the everyday usage of the school garden, and I have to think about in the school garden who does in the school garden what and when. And before I begin with this, I have a preliminary note. I think it's very important to have a principle of pedagogic primacy in school gardens, because a school garden is not a private garden, it's not a public garden. And so if you are thinking about what you do in the school garden, please consider that all garden action should have a pedagogic background. Don't do things that are not involved in your pedagogic concepts. And very important, I've really heard it from several teachers, that garden work is somewhere it is used as a punishment. So if some students have made something wrong in the school, they are or they have to weed for an hour in the school garden. I think this is a very negative aspect for this. Then they think a garden is the place where you just have something to do what you don't want to do. And garden should be a very positive place, and so don't misuse garden work as a punishment. And it's I think it's also very important that if you have some private visions of gardening, don't translate them or project these private visions in your school garden. Just think about what you want to do with the students in the garden, not what you want to do yourself. So, for example, if your objectives are to prepare your students for jobs, that you want to that they get to know green jobs, or that they learn self-responsible working, then garden work could be, for example, lawn mowing, so that trains the endurance of the students, or that they do tillage or farming, which is a physically hard work, that they just learn how it is to work physically hard. Most students don't do it in their free time, so they have to learn it before they choose a green job. If they don't, they will live a great surprise. or for example, cutting trees, that they learn to work with the dangerous tools. Or if you want your pedagogic objective is more nutrition knowledge, then you cultivate, of course, vegetables, but also you can, your pedagogic objective may be learning in science and science lessons. Then you do perhaps experiments, you observe and document with the students. Now we have a lot of important stakeholders which help to run a school garden in a good way. At first, they are all those who come from the education authority, that may be the school district facilities or administration from the city, from the district, from the county, whatever. And in the first place, I've put the caretaker. The caretaker is the one who can guarantee a good run of a school garden, but who can also inhibit the good run of a school garden. In the ideal framework, it would be that the caretaker maintains or support you in a technical and manual way. He repairs things, and he is part of the maintenance of the garden. And perhaps he mows the lawn. Maybe if it is not, as you have seen, a pedagogic objective for you to that the students may this themselves. Then the school board, in ideal conditions, it supports the school gardening proactively, not just if they are asked, but they do it in a proactive way. It enables, instead of complicating the things, it is often that you ask the school, but can I do this? Can I do that? And they say, oh, it's a little bit complicated. And sometimes they are not very helpful. And a good school board provides the actors at the school help and enables things. They rate the school garden support into the job description of the caretaker, so that the caretaker is really licensed to do work in the school garden. And the school board installs a risk assessment for the school garden in cooperation with the school management or the security officer to the school, so that the school gardeners themselves are on the safe side in working with the students in the school garden. So perhaps you have a garden department or a park and garden department at your city, and that may care for the basic garden maintenance. This is a very important point, because in general, you will not be able to maintain a garden or care for a garden, the whole garden yourself as a teacher or a school gardener. So you need help for the basic garden maintenance from the garden department. And this is not so easy to achieve, that there is such a strong support, but it's absolutely necessary. Perhaps the garden department delivers you bulk material like wood shavings, topsoil or compost, and brings it to the school garden. And it would be very nice if it reacts flexibly on changes in intensity of use, so that they keep maintaining the garden, even if there is a change, for example, in the personal resources, so that the garden can maintain also if you have very few people who can carry it from the side of the school. And of course, it must care for the traffic safety. It is you cannot do that as a school gardener themselves. This is, of course, a thing that the garden department has to make. And it is, well, I recommend that the school makes a yearly maintenance agreement with the education authority. For example, the education authority may be possible for the technical maintenance of the school garden, for the traffic safety, for lawn mowing, for example, weeding along the fences or cutting trees, except for example, berry bushes. This is just an example. It may, of course, it may be completely different for every school. And the delivery of bulk material. And the school community, which means these are the teachers, the students, the staff and the parents, they are responsible for the care of the beds or the berry bushes, the management of the compost, or to sweep leaves. So this may be a maintenance agreement between the education authority and school, but and nevertheless, how it looks like, it should be there. So it is a strong recommendation to have such a sort of maintenance agreement with the education authority. So we continue with the stakeholders. We have from the school, you have the teachers themselves. So there's at first the principals, the school management, and it should strengthen the back of the school gardeners. For example, towards the education authorities. You should not be the school gardener itself who defends things what are made in the garden against the education authority. This should be made by the principals. And the principals advocate for discharging time for school gardeners. If you're a teacher yourself and you care about the garden, that you get some discharging time for that. And they advertise for participation within the staff so that you're not alone, but there are more and more teachers going in the school garden and do lessons there and help in the maintenance of the garden. And they release their school gardeners for trainings. They propose staff meetings about school gardening, and they care for issues of safety and liability so that it is not on your shoulders. The other staff members, the teachers, they, in the best case, they use also the school garden for their lessons, and they provide to the school gardeners a sufficient amount of discharging time, and they join working actions. If you as school gardener make a work actions with staff and with parents, then they come and help. And of course, you have sometimes within your school staff some volunteers and trainees, and they could assist in the school garden lesson, and they could perhaps also develop educational material. And beside the staff, there's the other members of the school community, which may be pedagogic professionals in the afternoon in all-day schools. They could be there, they could care for the basic garden maintenance with the school garden team in the afternoon, which is in German an AG. I couldn't find a very good English word for that. It's like clubs and teams in the afternoon. And they offer support for the other teachers for curricular sessions, lessons and projects. The parents, of course, is a very, very powerful personal resource. And then they can, with their help, they can strengthen the back of the school gardeners, and they can equip their children for school garden work. I have often heard that the children come with white trousers and shoes to the school garden, and then the parents say, "Oh, it has become dirty," and you have trouble with them. So in the best case, they are also they support it very strong by equipping their children, and to join the working actions in the school garden, and to care the school garden in the summer break. Then you have at many schools some booster clubs or parent associations, and they can provide you a fixed annual budget for the school garden. And of course, the booster club can act as a project sponsor in funding requests when you have some things that you want to buy which are more expensive than others. They can provide funding. And then you have also external partners, neighborhood, which can support with their know-how, they can assist in lessons, they can serve in summer break, and so on. So if you look at the most frequent organization designs of school gardening, which is how is school garden embedded in the all-day school, in the school organization, then you have on sometimes you have an extracurricular school garden team in the afternoon exclusively. It is not used in the lessons, but only in the afternoon. And then you should ask if the educational authority itself organizes the caring in the afternoon, or if it is carried out by an external organization. The problem is often that you have a missing link to curricular lessons, that there is no communication between the school gardeners running the school garden in the afternoon and the teachers at the school who could use the school garden, of course, in the curricular lessons, but often they don't, because they even don't know the school garden as a learning space at all. And so what is important in this case is to promote good communication between these school gardeners in the afternoon and the regular teachers in the school. Then on the other side, you have an exclusive usage in lessons, which is mostly only in primary schools. Then this is very important to have a concrete integration of the school garden and school gardening in the curriculum of the school, and it's very essential that you have external support by the parents or other externals. And then you have a combination that you have curricular lessons by the teachers and extracurricular lessons by a team or a club. This is, in fact, actually the ideal solution for the organizational design. Then it is important, then it is well divided, that the team in the afternoon makes the management of the school garden and the basic garden care, and in the lessons, the curricular lessons, the teachers make single projects, but they don't have to care of the basic maintenance of the school garden. And what is there also very important is a good coordination between the teachers and the team in the afternoon. And then last but not least, you have these gardens which are outside of the school ground, and then you must consider that the education authority is not longer responsible for this. So you have to have all this support, this external support. And sometimes you get, of course, mostly strong support by the garden organizations, but they have often such a know-it-all attitude, and so you have to do their very sensible communication with them. So the ideal organization design is, of course, if you have maintenance of the school garden by an extracurricular team, and then the usage of the school garden for curricular lessons by the teachers. And that must be good and well structural anchored in the school organization. And this is the last thing I want to say: the good structural anchoring of school garden in school. How does it? What is needed for that? You should have a resolution by the staff conference and the school management which says we have a school garden and we use the school garden. And it is the best would be to integrate obligatory school garden lessons in the working plans of the subject conferences. For example, science in primary schools, they could use this in the education of basic nutrition knowledge by perhaps cultivating potatoes or something. Or in science in secondary schools, you have the topic climate protection, and so you cultivate regional vegetables and show that the ecological impact of this is less than buying it from far away. Or in biology in secondary schools, you have the topic biodiversity, and so you can observe and document what you find in the meadows and hedges and plants and animals. Then you should have a school garden library with a collection of educational material for these obligatory sessions, and a file with ideas for activities in further school garden lessons, so that teachers who want find easily material and suggestions what they can do and how they can use the school garden. And the school garden should be an agenda item once a year, at least in the staff meeting, ideally in January, February, when you plan this, the garden season. And you should have a school garden coordinator with a discharge time for this function to coordinate school garden activities at the school. And this school garden coordinator, at least, is the one who does the management. So if you remember what school garden, what management means, I have this, sorry, I must, here it is. School garden, we saw, is the controlling resources in an effective and efficient as possible. So sorry, this is animated in a in a wrong way. So what does it mean? The school garden coordinator is the motor of school gardening in the school. He is responsible for the communication between the different stakeholders. He makes plans, booking plans, irrigation plans, and he distributes his tasks, and he organizes participation. So this is what a school garden coordinator does. But what it doesn't do, and he is not responsible for all things doing it itself. He organizes that it comes to other persons, and he distributes the task, but he doesn't do all itself. And I think this is a very important message for you if you are a school garden coordinator or if you consult schools for school garden management, that you advise to have a school garden coordinator, but the school garden coordinator cannot be the one who does all for himself. So there are the others. Okay, this is my suggestion for you.